Hey there, Rappies. Rapper9198 here. Welcome to another edition of Ryan's Day Reading. Today I'll be reading Chapter 8 of Imprints, titled When the Ink Runs Out. So again, a little recap from the previous chapter, Bending Time. So that makes more sense. That title makes more sense because we have the mental ability to travel through time, and how everybody has a history, and certain events and experiences have made them who they are today in the present. But also there's sometimes, people might say something, it may not be intentional, but because sometimes you never know what somebody's gone through until they tell you, or until you learn about it once you get to know somebody. And so it could bring up something from the past, and then the past and the present collide. So again, it's like a wrecking ball. Our darkness can crash into their world. Each of us is a time machine, possessing the power to transport others to specific moments based on how we choose to collide with the fabric of our lives. And like a wrecking ball, our darkness can crash into their world, bringing a host of painful moments into the here and now. Or our light can press into their hearts, reminding them of the good things in their lives. Which is why we need to choose compassion, why we should act in love, why we must be kind, and why we need to embrace mercy. So again, that's kind of the overall message of the previous chapter there. So now we're going to go into Chapter 8, When the Ink Runs Out. And again, starting with another quote, this time from Shannon L. Alder. Carve your name on hearts, not tombstones. A legacy is etched into the minds of others and the stories they share about you. Every life is filled with stories, tales of how we mature and grow, the lessons we learn, the mistakes we make, how we respond to joy and pain. Some of these stories take years to unfold, while others last only minutes. Pieced together like the chapters of a book, they tell our histories. And like the lives we choose to live, some books are better than others. Sometimes this is because the author decided to write characters in a certain way, or let certain events happen. Situations that draw us deeper into the pages. But the books we enjoy the most have one thing in common. As the last chapter comes to a close and the story comes to its conclusion, the best ones don't truly end. When the last bit of ink is used and the final word is written, the greatest stories live on with new possibilities inside the hearts and minds of their readers. When life is lived like a good book, and a man or woman leaves the world in a way that those left behind are better because of them, those are the greatest stories. Their legacies aren't defined by the estates or the financial resources passed on to their next of kin, but rather by the beauty of the relationships they built. They live on in the lives of others because of the memories they made and the love they shared. Okay, so here's another story here. We have been blessed with many friends over the years, and we've often been lucky enough to get to know their parents as well. Rick Daniels, the father of our friend Luke. So this is, I think this is again Patrick and Justin talking. So Rick Daniels, the father of our friend Luke, has lived a life full of good stories. Some of his, some are the stories of others. Most are a mixture of both, the result of lives colliding in beautiful ways. Over the past few years, as we have gotten to know Rick, it has become apparent that the man is filled with wisdom. A retired Army veteran and nurse practitioner, Rick has a lot of experience to share. During his 28 years in the military, Rick served in various roles and divisions, including 4 deployments, eventually retiring as a full bird colonel. Amid pursuing a successful Army career, Rick married and started a family. In his late 40s, Rick was working as a professor at Oregon Health and Science University in Portland, Oregon. While working in higher education was rewarding, Rick missed spending time with patients. He began to work with men and women who were on hospice, individuals facing a variety of end-of-life scenarios who needed help with their care or someone to take them to clinic appointments and treatments. It was during this time that Rick found himself connected to one particular patient through his son Luke. The father of one of Luke's good friends had contracted non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and though he didn't know him well, Rick chose to care for David as his disease progressed. Rick soon learned that David had served in Vietnam as a Green Beret, and during his tours of duty was exposed to large amounts of Agent Orange. Agent Orange is a defoliant and herbicide widely used during the Vietnam War for crop destruction and jungle defoliation. Agent Orange is now presumed to be a causative agent for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is a form of cancer that affects the body's immune system. Tumors develop in the lymph nodes and lymphatic tissues, and patients often experience abdominal pain and swelling, chest pain, persistent fatigue, fevers, and night sweats. In advanced cases, tumors metastasize or spread to other areas of the body, such as the liver, lungs, or bones. Treatments vary, but in advanced cases, radiation and chemotherapy are necessary evils. When Rick began caring for David, these aggressive treatments had become a part of David's medical regimen. When he met him, Rick's new patient was still strong despite the disease. David stood at 6'1" and weighed in at a little over 200 pounds. With black hair and dark brown eyes that sat behind glasses, David was a quiet man who possessed a peaceful yet strong presence. After 2 tours in Vietnam, David served for a number of years as a police officer. And when Rick first met him, David was still hard at work. He managed the trucking division of Croman, a logging company in the area. From the onset of their relationship, Rick wanted to help David. He had an earnest desire to serve others, but he was also fascinated by David's background in the military and his years in the Special Forces. He figured David had some fascinating stories to tell, but what Rick learned from David ended up being very different from what he expected. At the beginning, sick as he was, David didn't need much help, but he still welcomed the assistance Rick offered in getting him to and from his appointments and scheduled treatments. Sometimes Kathy, David's wife, would join them, but usually Rick and David would go alone. Several times a week, Rick would pick up David. They would make a quick stop for coffee and then drive to David's various chemotherapy appointments, radiation treatments, and visits with internists or oncologists, usually about 25 minutes each way. These car rides were the opportunity Rick had been looking for. Time to get to know David's story and to hear about Vietnam. Every drive would start the same way. Rick would ask nurse questions, inquiring how David was feeling, looking for any new symptoms, or exploring potential side effects from chemotherapy or radiation. Once Rick was done with his check-in, David would change the subject, turning the conversation around to focus on Rick. David would ask about Rick's family, wanting to know how the kids were doing, what was new in Rick's world, making sure he was taking time for himself and spending time with his wife and kids. And with every response Rick gave, David would drill in a little bit more, looking for ways to get to know his new friend. As the weeks passed, the two men learned more and more about each other, and their friendship grew stronger. For months, they danced the same dance with every car ride and every conversation. As Rick cared for David, David looked for ways to return the favor. Over the course of more than a year and a half, the two men grew closer, and so did their families. Kathy became good friends with Rick and his wife, Nancy. Their grown kids spent time together, went home from school, or in town for holidays. The families often shared dinners and spent special occasions together, and their bond grew so strong that Rick and Kathy began to think of each other as brother and sister. Meanwhile, the disease worsened, cancer spread, and David faced the inevitable. As he continued to deteriorate physically, David developed severe joint pain and struggled to walk, and parts of his body began to fail. But Rick continued to take him anywhere he needed to go. And while Rick's medical questions dealt with more severe symptoms and heavier topics, the two friends also swapped stories from the field, reflected on fatherhood, and discussed what it meant to be a husband. Rick also learned more about David's life and his time as a Green Beret. The Army Special Forces, commonly known as the Green Berets, are formed from the best of the best. Groups of hundreds of men attempt to qualify for testing to become a Green Beret. Only 100 make it through to Green Beret training, and only 3 of those graduate. Those dedicated enough to make the cut are divided into teams of 12, and those teams are further separated into smaller groups of 6. David trained as a combat medic, but part of the Green Berets' success was that each member of the groups of 6 was cross-trained so they could do everyone else's job effectively. If one man fell, there was someone available to step in and do what needed to be done. In the summer of 2003, Rick and his family had a vacation planned for July, but as June approached, David's health declined rapidly, and Rick knew his friend's time was near. Not wanting to be away when David passed, Rick and his family canceled their vacation. When Rick told him this, David asked, "Now, why are you not going on your vacation? You need to spend time with your family." Rick replied, because I want to be here. Nothing else needed to be said. David knew why Rick was staying, and Rick knew he didn't need to spell it out. Throughout their friendship, Rick saw David cry 2 times. This was one of them. The other was 2 weeks later, when David made a special request of Rick. 10 days before he passed, with tears in his eyes, David asked Rick, "Will you do my memorial service?" "I would be honored," Rick replied. David smiled. "Okay, now I don't want you blubbering your way through it." David then listed his requests for the service. Rick would be in uniform, as is the tradition at funerals for veterans. He would give the American flag to Kathy and the kids. The Ballad of the Green Berets would play, and Rick would speak of David's priorities in life. Then David made another special request. David's love for his wife had been evident throughout the time Rick had known him. He had seen the two banter back and forth, teasing each other and flirting until the end. A month before he died, David told his wife, "I want you to date when I'm gone," and he meant it. He wanted to know Kathy would be taken care of, so she wouldn't be alone. So he asked Rick if he and Nancy would give Kathy gifts on her birthday, her and David's anniversary, and Christmas. Honored to be trusted with such a responsibility, Rick said, "Of course we will." David passed the day after he retired. The memorial service was held, and Rick did his best to honor his friend's request and not blubber his way through it. But the weight and beauty of David's special request didn't hit Rick until several months after the funeral. What began as a nurse caring for a patient led to a friendship where 2 men grew close through their shared experiences, the beauty and pain of life, and the inevitable final chapter of death. But there was something else going on over those 20 months. With each conversation and every car ride, David was getting to know the family he would one day entrust his wife to. Reflecting on David's request, Rick said, "What I didn't know was that there was compassion at work in this relationship in 3 different ways. One was from me to David as I cared for him. Another, 2, was from David to me as he pursued me. He truly wanted to know me and saw me as a friend. But the 3rd and most significant was through my family to Kathy." I never thought of this until after he had passed, but the relationship we now have with Kathy was made possible because of David. We would never have gotten to know her the way we do or become a part of her family if it hadn't been for David's pursuing us throughout his disease process. What I saw as my caring for David wound up being an avenue for him to care for his wife. David made sure that as he faced death, she would have a family in us. After the funeral, we got together with Kathy, or Sis as we call her, more and more. And in the months and years since David's passing, we've spent holidays together, celebrated birthdays, had good cries and hard conversations. We still give Kathy gifts on her birthday, her and David's anniversary, and Christmas. But really, those gifts are from David. God orchestrated an amazing thing through David's love for his wife. We do so much for those we love, But perhaps the most significant thing we can do is leave them with the best part of us when we go. Just like the Green Berets are trained to do every man's job, David needed to know there would be someone to do his when he no longer could. During all those car ride conversations, David was making sure there would be someone who would love Kathy, people who would look after her. David's actions guaranteed there would be a family who would care for his wife long after he was gone. We believe that every life has the power to live on in the lives of others, especially when we choose to place the needs of others before our own. When this happens, we leave a legacy built on the relationships we possess and known by the love we share. In the face of her husband's death, Kathy found herself surrounded by family because David understood that a life of love and compassion lives on long after we breathe our last. Like the chapters of a book, our lives are bound to come to an end, but we all have the opportunity to let our stories live on in the lives of those we love. The last words written in our book can leave the world a better place. If today were the day, would you be proud of the moments that brought you here? What will you leave behind when your ink runs out? All right, well, that concludes chapter 8 and also part 1 of this book. The part 1, which was titled, We're All Guides. Stay next time. We'll be going into the second part and then also reading chapter 9 titled Look at Me. And then the second part of this book, part 2, is titled Life is Like Legos. Which that totally makes sense because Legos are building blocks, and life, we're a lot of things that build us up. But again, I just love that message there. And again, I want to say this on here, that every life has the power to live on in the lives of others, especially when we choose the place in needs of others before our own. And when this happens, we leave a legacy built on the relationships we possess and known by the love we share. Yep. Alrighty, well, thank you, Rappies, very much. Hope you guys enjoyed that. And yeah, as I said, stay tuned next time as we start part 2 of the book and then also read chapter 9. All right, again, thank you, Rappies, very much. Love you all to death, and God bless.